Thank you very much, Terence, and thank you very much for having me. SMU was a really big part of my adult years. So when OER asks, I almost always say yes. So this is really great to be here with everyone, and thanks Emma for taking the time. So I think we have an hour for the fireside chat and then some time for Q&A. I'm going to keep our questions to maybe 30-35 minutes because I know everyone has a ton of questions. So I'm going to dive right into it. So Emma, you ended on something I really want to pull on about the trust equation. And I'm really struck by the denominator, specifically around self-orientation. So you're essentially saying that the thing that destroys trust actually isn't incompetence or unreliability, is actually ego. But when you, and I'm sure most of the managers in this room, when you ask you whether you have a big ego, most of them will say no, right? I mean, none of us are going to go like, oh yeah, I run a big company because I'm really doing it for myself. So I'm curious, so when you deal with all these leaders in your last 30 years, what does high or low self-orientation really looks like in practice?
Yeah, look, we all are, I think most of you, unless you're in the civil service, you're involved in the private sector, you manage businesses, et cetera. Your counterparts, whether these are your customers or your suppliers, people get that, people understand that, and guess what? They're running businesses as well. My point is when you can come across as very transparently transactional and all about making money for yourself and not about delivering value to someone and delivering value as the means for why you have the privilege of actually earning money, the more that you're projecting that sort of transactional me, kind of ethos, I think it works at cross purposes, at least in my line of work. That sort of transparency of self-interest, and this is about my company making more fees off of your company, as opposed to you have these very difficult problems. I think it might be hard to achieve those completely on your own. Here are the ways that we add value, and we have a result statement to share on how we're achieving that, and at times we're willing to put our own fees at risk associated with achieving joint goals. That sort of, we're in this together, I'm doing this because it's adding value, and it just so happens that there's an economic trade-off with that. That tends to work much better than kind of a more aggressive sell. This is in it for me as opposed to you.
Right, because also you talked about how it's particularly difficult being as a CEO today, with having to either be really technically savvy or even have the humility to accept that you actually need a lot of growing and whatnot. So like how does being a leader today, like how do you straddle that, like running a business but having the humility to recognize what you don't know and finding time still to be able to accelerate all your learning on everything you need to know?
Yeah, I think, listen, I don't think that's even a 2026 question. I think this is an evergreen question. You and I could have been sitting here 10 or 15, 20 years ago, we could be having the same conversation. I think the fundamentals are, when you're in a leadership role, or in any of your roles, I would frame it as, there's some things that only you can do, or some things that only you can do to have that sort of amplified impact. And I think that's important, to actually know what are the things where you, because of your role, or because of your background, your knowledge, you can have differential impact, and other areas where others will have more expertise. I mean, I'll give you one example. If you look at that kind of flow chart of time across the different slides that I shared earlier, you had a lot of crises over that period, over those periods. So I moved out to Asia in 1994 from San Francisco, and those were incredible times. I mean, these are like boom times, 94, 95, 96. And then when the Asian crisis hit, it was just cataclysmic in terms of the impact it had on the regional economy. And having lived through that and advised a lot of institutions, particularly restructuring big financial institutions, I developed, and our team developed, a tremendous amount of knowledge over that period that when the global financial crisis started to hit in 2008, it had a different flavor because of the sort of financial weapons of mass destruction, but the type of impact that it had on Portugal, Spain, Italy, Greece, and the banking systems in those markets, the playbook that we had in the Asian crisis, like setting up a good bank versus a bad bank, how to involve the government in nationalizing certain institutions, how to then go to market to actually open up the shareholding of those institutions with a cleaner balance sheet, et cetera. All those things that we learned in the Asian crisis, those are very relevant for that crisis. It was one of those moments where I said, actually, this is one of the things where, because of the experience that I've gone through, I differentially have capability to have impact. When it comes to certain other periods, I didn't have that. It's kind of knowing when you actually have something unique, some value to add that other people can't, and you oversample on that, and you have the humility to say, actually, in other areas, other times, I don't know that. I'm going to have to rely on other people to have their expertise have impact.
Okay. So I'd like to talk about the operating environment, because we talked about how these, what you called a fundamental shift in the world that we live in today. So, for most of our careers, we've operated inside a system that we know to be rules-based, multilateral institutions, open trade, predictable alliances. And given that you've led Bain in this part of the world for the last 30 years, so you've got the AFC, you've got the GFC, you've got the COVID, what feels categorically different this time? Is it just a cycle? Because we hear that a lot, it's just a cycle, things like that. Is it really a cycle, or is it something fundamentally that we really have to shift?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. I graduated from Berkeley in 1991. Okay, so those charts are a lot of fun. If you actually look at 91 to 2008, where the U.S. was effectively the major superpower, and it was an incredibly benign period of economic growth, this kind of flat, unconstrained world, WTO passing in 95, sure, we had crises. We had the Asian financial crisis here, locally we had SARS, et cetera. But by and large, that was a very benign period, and a period where there was, globalization was on fire. I would make a very strong assertion that period, 91 to 2008, that was the aberration. That was the aberration. You saw the pictures of the defense budget, the trade flows, et cetera. We are in a very fundamentally different post-global environment. And I think we need to look at things very differently. If you looked at the impact of the Asian financial crisis, you looked at the impact of the global financial crisis, there was a way that you could, analyze that and look at kind of outcomes on the other end, and just, it was to varying degrees extreme, but it was straightforward. This is far more extreme than that. It's a very different order. And all the rules that we learned in the 90s and the early 2000s from multinational corporations, they're fundamentally different. So whether you're working for a local company, a regional company, or multinational company, I do think the tectonic shifts in the world order are such that your means for competitive differentiation are amplified. And I think that is even further accelerated by the profound technological impact of AI as well.
That strikes in me simultaneously a sense of excitement, intrigue, and fear. I'm not sure.
I don't think you're alone.
So, because one scenario is that we transition from the U.S. hegemony to like a multipolar world, right? You have China, and then you have Russia doing something else over there. And another scenario is more genuinely disordered. No single system, the rules of engagement become contested in every domain simultaneously. How are you advising your clients to navigate this?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're describing two very polar extremes and a lot in the middle. We are preparing clients for both outcomes. I would say the base case is your first one, right? The multipolar but functional worldview where you have competing systems, you've got overlapping blocks, you don't have one universal playbook, but you have enough rules that you could trade through. I would make an argument that the second scenario, your kind of disordered scenario, that's kind of the tail risk. It's probably a fatter tail than we would like, but that's the tail risk. The first one is more the base case. But look, we're advising clients on preparation for either one. The reality is the kinds of operational moves that you make are similar, just to varying degrees with each one. How you kind of create optionality in your supply chains, how you're making decisions on geographic bets, whether Treasury can settle on multiple rails as opposed to single rails. We have to advise ourselves and our clients for a range of different outcomes in this world.
So what kind of timelines are you planning these days? Is it still like 5 years, or is it 3 years? And then do you have like scenario A through to D?
Yeah, look, of course, we all have to have long-term views. We have to have 3 to 5 year plans for our boards, but the level of optionality that we have is quite significant. The one thing that I think is different, where I think we've become more sophisticated, is to, while laying out that kind of medium-term strategy, trying to identify along the way, month by month, quarter by quarter, what are some of the signposts that you're seeing that mean we're going to have to, hey, we're going to have to make a pretty big adjustment here. Like anyone just trying to say, oh, here's a perfect 3-year plan in the middle of kind of April 2nd, 2025, and trying to just follow that, religiously, that would be just an unbelievable mistake. I think the level of signposts that we need to lay out that create optionality at different points, I think that's fundamentally important.
Right now, I actually feel like every time one of the hyperscalers or one of the AI companies publish a release, we're all scrambling to redo our business plan, which is really, really stressful. But I want to zoom into Singapore a little bit, because when you talked about the geopolitical shifts, fundamental shifts in the post-globalization world, there's also the nation states competing on sovereign capabilities. I was very struck by the speech that Canadian Prime Minister Marnie made in Davos, and it was so striking. Whether it's nations pulling back on energy, food, defense, AI infrastructure, data. Now, Singapore's entire modern history was really built on this rules-based order, positioning Singapore to be able to be useful to any side in any area, to be an important node in all the critical networks. But does that model still hold in this world where nations are increasingly being asked to pick sides? Because Singapore itself is also, you're engaged in a lot of national initiatives. They're also building up strong sovereign capabilities too.
Yeah, I think that's right. Look, I think things still hold. So Singapore's premise was always that the world would stay more open, right? It wasn't that the world would stay open forever, but it would stay directionally more open. The fundamentals for Singapore is that Singapore is a very credible nation, particularly in this part of the world in Southeast Asia. So things like rule of law, contract enforcement, predictable regulation, institutional reliability. These are things that you can scale, whether it's a benign or a less trusted world. What I think Singapore has to do now is build some hard capabilities that back that up, that back up the trust. And these are things like AI infrastructure, green and transition finance, biodiversity, biomedical, longevity research. Being neutral is an asset, but neutral with these sorts of sovereign capabilities, that's a much harder and more lasting kind of value proposition. So it doesn't come as any surprise with some of the budgetary investments that this country is very wisely making. I think you need to go beyond what had worked previously to just stay credible.
And I think for all the leaders in this room operating in Singapore today, I think this is something that many of us, really worry about. So, when uncertainty decreases, leaders often compensate in one of two ways. And I've seen, and I'm sure in your line of work, you've seen that happen as well. They either over-centralize decision-making, command and control, or they over-delegate because they don't know what to do. And it's like, it's everything is happening so fast. If you want to stay agile, you just got to decentralize control. Neither works particularly well. So based on your observation, what do the leaders who navigate this well actually do differently?
Yeah, look, I think you need to centralize more on the direction, on the compass, but then you have to decentralize on the actual local adaptation. And it's kind of ironic because I think a lot of leaders do the exact opposite. In times of uncertainty, it's like, okay, I'm going to centralize all the decision making, that feels really good. But then the compass and the ability to actually pivot locally doesn't exist. And as I mentioned, in this world of post-globalization, if anything, the level of kind of local autonomy you need to have to adapt with all these changes at all three levels, in the real economy, financial economy, and the digital economy, that level of local adaptation is really, really essential. And I think a lot of companies kind of get that wrong with the knee jerk. I'm just going to centralize every single decision. It actually works completely at odds with where the world is now, where I think it's headed in the future.
Mm-hmm. And as senior leaders, we're constantly contemplating our roles, looking at the macro and the micro context and navigating megatrends. And you pointed out two particular megatrends. So one is on the decentralization of banking, and then the second one is AI as a structural disruptor. So just a little bit on the financial architecture. Whether it's decentralized finance, weaponization of the dollar system, central bank digital currencies. For leaders who are outside of the finance sector, it might sound a little bit abstract. So talk us through some of these, and how should non-financial leaders be thinking about this as well?
Yeah, it's kind of a good question. So I gave the example because I do a lot of work with financial institutions, and I like it because it's really at the vanguard of change. But I know that a lot of people in the audience don't work directly in financial institutions. I'm hoping the lessons are still relevant. And honestly, it won't feel so abstract if let's say you're a treasurer and you can't settle a payment, or your sanctions exposures, they suddenly multiply, or you need to make a payment on a rail you've never heard of. I would say these sorts of situations, these are real economy situations. These are not just for bankers. And maybe a few concrete implications for non-FS leaders in the room. One is that funding and working capital, they're going to go more multi-rail. So already, if you look at how much of banking is done by non-banks, non-traditional players, that's already about 20%. That goes to like 35% by 2030. So your own CFO needs more of a multi-rail liquidity strategy, has to understand the potential for tokenized deposits, in some cases central bank digital currencies, and wallets where relevant. The second is, settlement is very much moving to 24/7 real time. That's kind of an immeasurable shift that's happening. And that changes your DSO, your DPO, your supply chain finance, your intraday liquidity economics. And if you are not embracing that and taking advantage of that, your competitors are, and that's a structural disadvantage if you don't get that right. The third is FX and trade corridors are very much diversifying. So you have these central bank digital currencies within the region. You've got stable coins going live. Some of the payments are going to go apart from the traditional correspondent bank chain. And if you're not a part of that, you're at a disadvantage. And then lastly, you are going to see an increase in the impact of sanctions. I mean, you're seeing that literally day by day. Anyone that purchases oil will live and breathe this. So again, I'd make the assertion this is not so much just a financial services situation. This is very much a real economy situation.
One thing you mentioned in your slides that I actually really liked was the non-human touch retail banking.
Yes.
That's one part I really liked. The second one about AI. So I'm super passionate about the application of AI. For me, it's an intersection of hospitality, which is a very human capital heavy industry. You chair the scientific advisory committee for MIT's M3S research group here, which is a really cool role. And it's specifically researching about how humans and organizations adapt to AI. And during our chat last month, you mentioned the idea of AI as a competitive disadvantage. What does it mean, and who's already falling behind from where you sit?
Yeah, I think the people that are falling behind, and this is many, a lot of people approach AI as a, how do I get 10 to 20% productivity? Get me 10 to 20% productivity, or worse, get me 10 to 20% headcount, because we have AI, we shouldn't be able to do that. And as I hope that came across with the pages, this is more about job augmentation. If you get job augmentation right, it allows you to make faster decisions. It allows you to be more creative about the products that you make. It allows you to figure out cheaper, faster ways of actually creating value for the clients that you work with. It's trying to find opportunities to create competitive advantage by rethinking your business model with the power of AI. It's not about give me 10 to 20% efficiency. The problem is that is the mode that actually I think a lot of companies are in. It's exacerbated by all the tech layoffs that have been announced by the hyperscalers. Ironically, that is less about the impact that AI is having on the efficiency of their workforces. That is more about their need to actually finance a lot of these massive investments. But because this is done by very leading tech companies, people just see this as, oh my God, if tech companies are doing this, why am I not getting my 10-20% efficiency? I think it's just a completely kind of an ass backwards way of looking at it. I think you have to take a more fundamental look about how can I create competitive advantage with the power of AI? And if that eventually leads to certain roles and functions in my company, and more importantly, how I'm organizing my workforce, that it creates some sort of savings, which may, actually not translate to job losses, because if you can create more advantage, you can get faster revenue growth, you're going to need more people. You can keep those people down by redefining the job scopes. I think that's the way that you need to kind of look at these AI transformations.
Yeah, I do find the whole idea of reimagining the work, ground-up redesign, you talked about it earlier, that was a really intriguing thought for me. And so we've talked a lot about what is changing, post-globalization world, mega trends. Feels like the world is going off rails and can barely breathe, but we tend to focus on these things that will change. But I want to ask you what you think will not change in the next 10 years. What are these eternal truths? Regardless of what comes May.
Look, I'll focus on three things. I think one is scale, defined the right way, always matters. Scale drives leadership economics. Now, what is the scope of your business and what the business definition is, that may change. That probably will change. But your scale in a properly defined business, that is immeasurably, statistically tied to higher performance. The second is always focus on the customer. If you orient your business model about being hyper-focused on what it is that my customers need and how do I meet and get ahead of those needs, good things will come from it. And the third is really create a culture in my company that has trust, where you have trust in your business and there's trust in the workforce. And that then embodies itself in terms of how your clients work with you or how your suppliers work with you. Those are good things. So on the first one, I just, ever since I joined consulting, we had all these different types of training on the kind of business economics, and it was always rooted on leadership economics. And I fundamentally believe that. And actually, if you look at everything that's happening in the world today, even if you look at Anthropic versus OpenAI versus everybody else, this is a race to get to leadership economics. The second, on focusing on the customer, we came up in Bain with this concept called NPS. I'm sure a lot of you kind of use that in your businesses. I really believe this. I've seen statistical evidence that if you can get NPS right, if your NPS is differentially 2-3 times higher that of the next competitor, you will get better economics. You will have more longevity in your client base, and you will make more money, and you'll create more value in the process. You're actually doing good and benefiting from that. And third, that's why I wanted to show the trust equation. I think this gets overlooked a lot, underestimated, that we are still actually human beings. And I think in this day and age, with all the disruption that we're talking about, having the ability to connect, and I think that the intimacy part on the numerator of that equation, I think, again, people undersample that. My big worry is that with so many different forms of media that people engage with, I think it's very easy to underinvest in kind of personal engagement and relationships that undermine the I in that equation. That has a very deleterious impact. So to me, those are the kind of three inevitable truths that continue 10 years ago, 10 years from now.
Yeah, and the other thing too is something we're reading in the news every day, whether it's about companies laying off people or how we're leaving some of the population behind who are really worried about what this age of AI means to them. And during our chat a couple of weeks back, we talked about the social contract as well. And as leaders who have outsized impact on our employees, on society, what do you think about how we approach the social contract amidst of all this change and all these anchors that you just talked about? Yeah,
look, I would hope that every one of us in this room approaches the answer to that question in their own way, with their own sincerity, with their own story, whatever that may be. And that could just be concentration on the being nice to the people that are around you, whether that's at work or at home and your immediate family and friends. It could mean trying to figure out other ways that you can have a contribution to society. And by the way, that will flex at different times in your life. I mean, for me, the story with SMU is I had moved to Singapore in '94, as I had mentioned, and I'd worked really hard to get to partner in my company. I made partner in 2002. And after I made partner, I wanted to figure out a way to contribute. And in my family, I was very fortunate. My parents are from Hong Kong and from Taiwan. And they had very modest backgrounds. And they were able to get to the United States because of education. My mother got a scholarship to do a master's at the University of Buffalo in New York, and my father got sponsored to do his PhD at the University of West Virginia, and they ended up meeting while they were both, my dad was doing his postdoc, my mother was doing her master's, and they met. I grew up in a very lower middle class family in upstate New York, and everything they've achieved in life, everything I've achieved in life is because of the power of higher education. And when I made partner in 2002, I wanted to actually find a way to give back. And I looked around and I saw this SMU university, and I was like, what a great idea. There were these two universities based on a UK pedagogy, and then these guys have the guts to go to University of Pennsylvania and try to get them to help set up this brand new university and set it up from scratch. And it was 2 years old when I thought, I'd like to figure out a way to contribute. So I joined the advisory board at the business school in 2005, and then from there ended up joining the board of trustees and helped launch the College of Integrated Studies, which I chair. But in my case, I had a passion for higher education because all the benefits in my life came from that, right? And I found my own way to try to give back. But that's a very personal thing, and that's my hope that each one of us, the social contract is a very individualized answer, and whatever it is that you're passionate about, I hope that at the right point in time, when you have the capacity and the capability, you channel that the right way. Because I'll tell you, for me, just having looked at the last 23 years of seeing SMU grow, my God, I have such immense pride, and I look around this room, just it's just amazing where this university has come from. And I was told that this year there's going to be our 50,000th alumni from SMU, which is quite remarkable. There's 47,000 alumni as of 2025. It's going to be 50,000 in 2026. What an amazing achievement. And so sorry, a bit of a long-winded answer to your social contract question.
But can I suggest that maybe you just do a executive program at SMU so that we can call you alumni as well?
Yes, actually.
Because you're so passionate about SMU, which is incredible. But I like this shift into something a little bit more personal, because we talked about strategy, about the world, Singapore and whatnot. You also lead the Lean Foundation with your wife, Trina, and the both of you are very active in global citizenry, philanthropy. There are some causes that you feel very strongly about. This is consistent thread of giving back. So you talked about how higher education was something that really worked for you and your parents. Why does it matter? And do you think this sense of responsibility to be something larger than the organization that we serve is a leadership quality that can be developed? If so, how?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I'll go back to, I got promoted to partner in 2002, so we had this new partner training program, and we had this older partner. His name was Harry Strachan from, he opened our Costa Rica office. Fascinating guy. And he led this exercise, which I still remember. He said, let's say we're all fortunate enough to get to our 80th birthday. What do you want to celebrate? What do you want to look back on your 80th birthday and be proud of? And I was 33 years old at the time, and I thought, that's quite a profound question. And it made me think a lot. It was one of the things that triggered me to think about, trying to way to volunteer and help with SMU. But it was along those same lines that, look, we all work very hard in our day jobs. I know I do, I'm certain you all do. But, as important as all that feels and the impact that we have, which, I love what I do, I'm proud of what I do. I somehow feel when I get to age 80, I'm not gonna be thinking about like that really great presentation I made or that, you know, $10 million mandate I won. Those things are all nice, but I think I'm gonna look back and I'm gonna think about the relationships that I've had in my life, the people I've had an impact on, the organizations, whether it's work or in many cases outside of work, where I've had some sort of, you know, indelible impact, things that only I could do. It was really in that spirit. And then, you know, the idea behind this foundation is 10 years ago in 2016, we were celebrating our 20th wedding anniversary, and we thought, instead of having like some big party or whatever, why don't we actually do something right, which is, you know, instead of just organizing philanthropy on a one-off basis, let's do that in a structured basis. Here in Singapore, you're very blessed. MCCY is a group called Community Foundation of Singapore. And they, even for, you know, small-time people like my wife and I, they help you structure a charitable foundation. And that's what we did. And it was one of the most meaningful things, and one of the first things that we added to what we had been doing philanthropically was to set up a set of scholarships for SMU students that want to study abroad, to help, you know, those that have financial means to be able to do that. Because what we found was, I think you all know, like, to graduate as an undergraduate here, 100% of our students have to do something overseas. And when I spoke to a lot of students, the kind of gold standard that everyone wanted was to do this semester abroad. But guess what? That's like really expensive. Like, if you don't have means and you have a part-time job and your parents can, you know, barely get by just paying your local education, try going to like Amsterdam for like, you know, 12 weeks. That just it didn't work for a lot of people. So that we set up this scholarship, endowed this scholarship, because I thought it was, you know, it was something very meaningful. And to your earlier question about, part of your question about, you know, why that matters, you know, we had a reunion recently. We had about 15 of our scholarship alums together in one place, and just seeing them of all different ages and what they're doing. And yeah, that's the kind of thing when I'm 80, I'm going to look back upon it and have, I think, like a lot of immense pride and fulfillment.
Yeah, I'm sure I can speak for those as well. So, so it's likewise for me. You're going exchange in SMU. The only reason why I could have gone was because of a scholarship from the ASEAN. That was the ASEAN Dual Fellowship, and that was something that was extremely life-changing. So I can only imagine for these 15 odd students that the scholarship has sponsored, it really means a lot to them. So thank you for that.
It's a bit like that chart, so it depends a little bit of the function that you're in, for starters. Within that function, what is the role, etc. For what it's worth, I think the default is, if people are in a role, let's say the average person has been in the role for 5 or 8 years, the domain knowledge that they've built up in that role, I mean, that's got to be worth something, right? You pay a person a certain amount of money every year, but if they have 5, 8, 10, 15 years of experience doing what they're doing, that's got to be worth something. And if you're trying to kind of reinvent the whole workflow of how that thing is done, quite frankly, you're better off actually working with the people in that area. Now, if you then reinvent the workflow, and it's going to take 6, 18, 24 months to get that right, and then with a redefined workflow with the benefit of automation and AI, et cetera, you can actually do, you know, more with that function with less. Then you have the option of figuring out, okay, well, those people that did that, actually, if they did that well, maybe they can actually go and do that for some other function, or they could be one of the key people staying in this function to grow it, et cetera. It's very bespoke, but I think too often there's this simple thing of like, oh, AI is very powerful, it should create efficiency, whack. It doesn't work that way. Actually, you've got to actually fundamentally rethink the way things are done. And guess what? Some of the people that are long tenured in those roles, if they are not Luddites and they actually embrace the technology, are open to change, open to training, they can have the biggest impact. And at least in the day-to-day work that we're driving with transformations, a lot of those long tenured employees are actually some of the most powerful if they're embracing these new tools. Yeah, look, I mean, we could probably spend an hour and a half having this dialogue. Well, if I can just give you a couple of reflections for whatever it's worth. I think the traditional, tiger parent approach of like, thou must be a lawyer or a doctor or what, I actually think it's not gone, but like, I think that's diminished significantly in this day and age. So the idea that like you can only major in this one thing, oh, you have to major in engineering, like all the parents that push their kids into like you have to do computer science, and now guess what? Computer science, don't get me wrong, it's very important, but the way that it's done with the power of vibe coding, it's actually this software development lifecycle is shrunk, and you do it very so. This idea that we're going to shove kids into something that they may not want to do, but we think we know better. I think that day and age is off. I think the second thing is the level of kind of interpersonal skills that kids need to develop, and that's tied a little bit to that intimacy if you think about it in a business context with the trust equation. I think that's very important. I'll give you an example. In my business, we're still hiring as many. If anything, our recruiting classes have been bigger in 26, 24, and our forecast for 27 is bigger than 26. We're still hiring a lot of fresh grads. What we are oversampling for is the ability to work well with people. So typically when we screen people, there's like 3 categories. There's what we call value addition, which is like just pure analytic horsepower problem solving. Second is client communications, can they kind of work well with external parties? And third is extraordinary teaming, like the ability to work well with others within a team. Don't get me wrong, the first one is table stakes, you need to get that right. But the second and the third is much higher, because when I joined at the entry level, if I saw a client, once a week in my first year at that entry level, that would be like, wow, you actually saw a client. Now it's like, my fresh grads, we put them in front of the client all the time, because a lot of the basic analytic tools, you can, per the augmentation question, that stuff gets done really easily. You actually have a lot more time. So the ability to kind of socialize recommendations, engage to clarify what are some of the assumptions, working with that person in the HR function that I mentioned that has done the job for 18 years, but would benefit from someone who's 22 years old, who's very well equipped with all these tools to help he or she kind of reimagine the process. It's different, and that has been quite a fundamental shift in my line of work, and I think that's the case for a lot of yours. So I would emphasize the need to develop these interpersonal skills, and maybe that involves more time spent in things like team sports or whatever, but just I think we need to kind of reimagine some of the priorities versus like what you would have recommended 10, 15 years ago. Well, this part of the world is very diverse, right? So Singapore, I don't think will be constrained. I think Singapore already, before, if you look at, you talk to anyone at MTI, they've been planning scenarios for nuclear, for all different sources. So I don't think that's a constraint. I do think there are other countries in the region, look at Indonesia, in particular, Philippines, where economically, yeah, there could be material constraints. On the other hand, in some of these economies, your ability to build transition finance, green finance, if done at scale with the right kind of political capability and willpower, yeah, actually they have resources that Singapore doesn't. So I think it's a good question. I think people are underestimating right now just what the gap is in terms of the available, I mean, you see this every day with your day job, but the available infrastructure that's going to be required, even with or without the temporary shock that we're having right now in the Middle East. I think it's a great question. It's quite profound. Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think there's often nothing better than demonstrating something in real life. So I think the best way to talk about job augmentation is to create a little bit of a skunkworks project on your own with the power of Claude or whatever LLM tool that you're using, and bring to your boss something that you've done with the power of AI and say, look, actually, if we replicated this throughout my department and we did the same thing in HR and in finance, and if we reimagined collections, et cetera, I think that's very, very powerful. So can I give you a separate thing, which is one of the more, on the negative side, one of the most dispiriting things I think we can do is go to our team members and say, wow, look at what I just did with AI. I could do that without you. And I've literally heard conversations like this. I've heard it, in so many different places. And these little microaggressions are not as extreme as what you're describing with the CEO saying, okay, I'm going to go shouldn't I fire 20% of the people? But these little microaggressions, they undermine the trust equation in a way that is quite profound. And I think right now, we underestimate how dispirited and how anxious, and then how unproductive, ironically, some of our younger team members are, if instead we are empowering them to say, look, actually, I'm trying to solve this, let's together try to figure out how we could unleash the power of AI. Because by the way, these things are often much better done in groups as opposed to just purely individually. Then I think instead of microaggressions, there's a level of teaming, there's a level of trust building, and quite frankly, there's a level of impact that you can then kind of carry upstairs to say, hey, look at the power of what we're doing. I think we can sell this much more of this line of business by doing these different things. I'll give you a very personal one for what it's worth. You know, my father was born in China, and then in 1946, you know, my grandfather was with the Kuomintang, and they went to Taiwan. So my father's side of the family is largely all in Taiwan. There's a handful like him that ended up emigrating elsewhere, but they're pretty much all in Taiwan. Taiwan keeps me awake at night on so many levels. I think the precedents that have been set in the Strait of Hormuz, that really scares me, because the world chip supply, which is highly dependent on Taiwan, blockage in the strait there, you know, is profound. Even worse if it escalates further, and you know, U.S. defense forces in this part of the world, particularly with relation to China, are diminished. You know, that has a truly, you know, profound impact on the, you know, sovereign viability of the population there. And I think the signals that then reverberates to the rest of the region are quite material. And I think in that sort of instance, I mentioned on that top of the pyramid of the kind of digital economy, if there is a further bifurcation between the US and China, which is exacerbated by, you know, aggression in Taiwan of different forms, whether it's trade or, God forbid, military, that keeps me awake at night. I mean, I think it's, you know, not just for my relatives there, but just the impact it has, frankly, on all of us and the global economy. That worries me a lot. So, and I think it worries a lot of people looking at what's happening over these couple of days in China. How many people are in your hedge fund?
Like 40.
40, okay. To be fair, in a 40-person company, that's not a crazy idea, right? I mean, I think if you're trying to do that in a 40,000 person company, I think you then hit certain, you know, practical constraints. But I like the spirit behind it. I'll take it a step further. I think what a lot of it is like, oh, well, you people down here should be using it. I actually think C-suite and board has to be the one leading from the front. So we have a board of directors in Bain, and these are not independent directors. They're kind of people like myself. These are kind of functioning partners that have a day job. So there's 10 board members, our CEO, and 9 appointed board members. We just recently had a board meeting where we did it in San Francisco. We did it deliberately because we wanted to spend a day doing a trek, having our 10 board members meet with Anthropic and Decagon and, you know, all these different AI and super hyperscaler companies, as well as a number of startups. And we made them do exercises. So like we gave them like literally 8 exercises that they had to complete before going and doing these meetings. And they had to actually do the work themselves. I'm doing the same thing with a lot of our clients when we're encouraging them to do board treks to Silicon Valley or to London, sometimes to Singapore. And same thing, we're actually having them, you actually got to do the exercises. I think this is important. I don't think you can have the moral authority to tell all your junior people to use how many tokens unless you yourself are kind of innovating on the front lines. Yeah. In a lot of Asian economies, and it's not just Singapore, if you go to Hong Kong, by way of example, with the recent privatization of Hang Seng Bank by HSBC, I don't know if you saw this, but HKMA, one of the first things they said, there's not going to be any kind of job losses, et cetera. So it's not just Singapore, a lot of Asian economies for the right reasons where you have, you know, large workforces that could be at risk from different, whether it's AI or different kind of transactions. They're trying to protect good jobs in the economies. I am very much in admiration of what's happening here in Singapore, where the emphasis is not kind of month by month, quarter by quarter, but it's multi-year. And if you actually look at the concerted effort that is not new news, it's been going on for a long time, to give opportunities to upskill at the mid-tier career level. And by the way, we here in SMU, with SMU Academy, where you can use Skills Futures credits, particularly for stackable programs with significant MOE and MOM funding, it's tremendous. I mean, I don't know of another economy in the world where the government is actually stepping in to provide very generous resources, but the onus is on the individual, right? The onus is on the individual to take that up. Now, obviously, there's a lot of encouragement. We've been asked to do a lot with our SMU Academy to make the offering as attractive as possible, again, with this focus on the customer. But I think there's a very pragmatic approach, which is, look, we're not Luddites. We can't kind of like ignore the technology. At the same time, we can't get too much in the way of kind of, Adam Smith. But what we can do is create the resources that are available for mid-tier upskilling that I just frankly have not seen in any other economy in the world. I think there's some things that are kind of evergreen, which is, for a lot of people, when they graduate from university, they've got a great education, but they don't have as many practical skills or as much domain knowledge to be successful in starting a business. I mean, you're going to have the rare Bill Gates or Michael Dell, in the dorm room kind of, or Zuckerberg doing something remarkable. You're going to have those unicorns, but you're going to have a lot of people, like normal people, that don't have that. So actually the idea of an entry-level job in some sort of business or civil service or whatever, I don't know, I don't think that goes away. I think one thing that is different is the power of this technology, and I put that in the future back thing, like this quote-unquote zero-cost financial services. I'm really taken by this idea that you can use technology to set up a one-person business. And I'm talking, you can outsource a lot of the physical infrastructure, etc. But like, if you get it right, you could actually scale businesses with technology and with outsourced partners, etc., which is one person. Now, I'm not sure like every single graduate is going to be able to do that. That takes a certain something, right, in terms of willpower, capability, just gumption, etc. But that is the thing that's a little bit different now. You literally just couldn't have done that before. So to your question, to me, that's the most direct change. I'm not sure what percentage of the population that model is applicable to. I'm personally of the belief that entrepreneurs, it's a certain type of individual, a certain type of willpower and capability, and just it's a small percentage of the graduating public, but that percentage may be just so much more empowered now than they would have been 5 to 10 years ago. So thank you.
We're going to do 3 rounds of rapid fill in the blanks.
Sure.
All right, first round. Where are we now in this cycle? Hard times create strong persons create good times create weak persons create hard times.
Your second one?
Strong persons create good times?
Yeah, I believe so.
Very positive. All right, next round. In today's world, we should all fill in the blanks.
In today's world, we should all embrace AI individually.
All right, the last one. When I think about the future, I am filled with
optimism.
Great. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank them.